As Christians seek to share the gospel in a world that has so many different beliefs, we often encounter religious groups and we're just not sure how to categorize them. They use language that sounds Christian, but they say things that we have never heard in our evangelical churches before. In addition, their name causes us to maybe confuse them with other groups. A group like this is Christian Science. They use the Bible, but they also use other books alongside the Bible. They talk about Jesus and they use Christian language. Are they Christian? Or do their beliefs contradict God's word? Once popular and growing, Christian Science is today a dwindling religion. However, their teaching influenced many different denominations of the church today. So, let's talk about Christian Science. Welcome back to the Church History Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Lee Siemens. We started this podcast with our first episode on June 8th, 2019, and that was with the story of Jesus Christ. We've traveled through time, and today we're in the 1800s, and this season we're discussing different ways the church was attacked in the 1800s, alongside the great missionary movement that we talked about in our last season. I love getting letters from listeners who tell me how this podcast has helped them understand church history and, most importantly, grow in their Christian faith. That is why I do what I do. People ask me how they can support the podcast. I don't make any money with this podcast, and it's never been the goal of the podcast. However, I am slowly turning the podcast into a series of books, and if you want to support the podcast and learn more about church history, buying the book series is the best way you could do that. My first book, The Church is Born, tells the story of Jesus from the time of Jesus' birth until the Council of Nicaea and the impact of Constantine. My second book, The Church is Corrupted, comes out tomorrow, and here's a little commercial for it. I previously published the book, The Church is Born, which was part 1 in our series, and that delved into the creation of the church. But my second book picks up where the first one left off. It offers a unique and insightful perspective on the church's journey. Discover the rich history of the church, its triumphs, its failures, and its heroes. In this second book in the series on church history, we journey through the pivotal moments that shaped Christianity as we know it. From the foundational theology of the early church to the inspiring lives of great men and women who boldly stood for their faith. Explore the church's role during the Crusades, the Inquisitions, and even the discovery of America. Learn how over centuries the church began to slowly lose its way, setting the stage for the monumental changes just before the Protestant Reformation. With each chapter highlighting a different story, you're going to be inspired by the heroes of our faith and challenged to reflect on the lessons from the church's successes and its stumbles. Whether you're a seasoned historian or just beginning your exploration of church history, this book offers valuable insights for everyone. So if you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do it is to purchase the book tomorrow. Purchasing on launch day is important because it moves the book up in the algorithm, making it more visible for other buyers. Today we're talking about religion and Christian Science. Now this is not Scientology. Often when people hear Christian Science, they're confused and think it's Scientology that Tom Cruise made famous. Scientology was created in 1954. We will eventually get to that. We're a long way from 1954 right now. But Christian Science started in the 1800s. So let's dive in. Christian Science traces its belief and practices back to its founder, Mary Baker Eddy. Mary was born in New Hampshire in 1821 to Congregationalist parents. Her parents took their faith seriously, and they were part of a strain of Puritan Calvinists, which was fading out but still present in New England during that time period. Mary was born in 1821, and she was the youngest of 6 children. Her parents were Mark and Abigail Baker, and they were farmers in New Hampshire. Throughout her childhood, Mary often had to miss school because she was sick. In her 20s, she was hit with tragedy after tragedy. It was really a decade of trauma. When Mary was 20 years old, her brother, whom she was very close to, died. It took her years to grieve this, but after 3 years, it seemed like her life was moving in a good direction. She met and married her husband. She married George Washington Glover, who was a building contractor. She married him December 1843. But just 6 months into their marriage, her husband contracted scarlet fever and died. Mary was pregnant at the time, and 3 months after her husband's death, she gave birth to her son, leaving her a young widow and single mother. She named her son George after his father. She did find love again and became engaged to a young man who loved her and wanted to raise her son as his own. Her family was happy to see that Mary's life was beginning to take a happy turn. But then, Mary's mother died, and once again it rocked Mary's life. 3 months after the death of her mother, Mary was hit again when her fiancé passed away. After the loss of her mother, Abigail Baker, and her fiancé in 1849, Mary's life got even worse. She still, ever since childhood, suffered from frequent illnesses, and without her mother's help or for her fiancé, Mary could not take care of her son George. So, Mary was forced to give young George up for adoption to her family's nurse and the nurse's husband. Now, Mary was left with nothing, and throughout all of this, Mary continued to have unexplained illnesses. In her 30s, Mary met another man named Daniel Patterson. They were married. Daniel was worried about his wife's health, and he wanted to help Mary with all of these unexplained illnesses. So in 1861, he met with a mesmerist. That was someone who uses hypnosis to heal people. The person Daniel found to help his wife was Phineas Quimby. Phineas Quimby had developed a reputation for curing people without medicine. Mary visited Phineas Quimby in 1862, and she did experience temporary relief from her condition. Phineas was a famous healer in Portland, Maine, and under Phineas's hypnotherapy, she did get help. However, after having a relapse, she went back. But Mary believed Phineas Quimby had found a key to Jesus' healing methods. Over the next several years, she began to learn Phineas Quimby's methods and wrote her ideas about healing. Mary wanted to learn the same methods of healing that Phineas Quimby had, but there was a problem. Phineas Quimby was very hostile towards religion. Phineas was an atheist who hated religion, especially Christianity. But Mary wanted to use Phineas's ideas, but implement them into her Christian beliefs. It's the winter of 1866. Mary is walking on an icy sidewalk during a cold winter day. Suddenly, she felt her legs slip from under her and she fell to the ground. She could hear and feel her spine. This injury to her spine caused Mary to be bedridden for many, many months, and she almost died. During this time, she turned to her Bible and began to read the accounts of Jesus' healing, specifically when Jesus healed a paralytic. During this time, she experienced a miraculous healing. Mary began to focus on the story of Jesus' healings in the gospel, and she healed from her accident of falling on the sidewalk. Through studying her Bible, she began to believe that spiritual healing was based on divine laws of God. And she believed these laws could be applied to anyone to heal every form of human suffering and sin. In the early 1870s, Mary moved to Massachusetts, and here she began to gather eager learners and started teaching her spiritual healing principles. In 1875, she founded the Christian Science Association, and that year she published the book Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. The 1800s were not a time when people were really open to ideas that women held, so it is a testament to Mary that she was able to start a new religion and publish a book during this time period. However, her husband Daniel was not a fan, and he walked out and left her. Mary was alone for many years, and eventually in 1873 she was officially divorced. 2 years later, during her teaching ministry, she met and married Asa Gilbert Eddy, who was one of her students. And that is when her name officially became Mary Baker Eddy. Now, Mary repeatedly attempted to get established churches to accept her healing concepts, but she was only met with rejection. So, in 1879, frustrated and disappointed, she formed her church in Boston, called the Church of Christ Scientists. Here's a quick summary of the Christian Science religion. They believe in the power of prayer and spiritual healing. The teaching can be summed up like this: God has infinite love for us and wants the best for us. Illness is a misrepresentation. It's not reality. Through our faith and positive mind, we can be healthy and we can be healed. Mary founded the Massachusetts College in 1881. However, tragedy was still part of her life, and a year later her husband Asa died. And then in 1889, she had to close the college. But then she moved on to rewrite her new book, Science and Health. In addition to Science and Health, she also published a 100-page church manual, which is still used today as a guide. The most famous of her publications was the Christian Science Monitor, which is a magazine she started when she was 87 years old. And since the time of its publication, this newspaper has collected 7 Pulitzer Prizes. At age 89, Mary Baker Eddy died on December 3rd, 1910. Today, her religion has over 1,700 churches and is in 80 countries. To wrap up, I'm going to answer 2 questions. First, does Christian Science hold biblical doctrine? While Christian Science attempts to build its belief on the Bible, it abandons faithfulness to historical Christian doctrine in 2 very significant ways. 1 is their belief on the Trinity, and 2 is their belief on matter. First, Christian Science does not hold the historical doctrine of the Trinity. In Science and Health, Mary wrote this about the Trinity. She said the Trinity suggests polytheism rather than the one ever-present I am. You see, Christians believe one God eternally exists in 3 distinct persons, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Each person is equal in deity while retaining distinct personal characteristics. However, Christian Science insists on a oneness of God, and it denies the deity of the Son and the Spirit. The second way that Christian Science differs is the view on matter. They believe the physical world is simply an illusion. Mary claimed that matter is a mortal error, and she also wrote, matter is unreal and temporary. This is an ancient heresy called Gnosticism, which the apostles attacked in the New Testament. I wrote quite a bit about Gnosticism in my first book, The Church is Born, which you can order today, or you can wait and order it tomorrow when you order my second book, The Church is Corrupted. We do get into Gnosticism quite a bit in our first book. Gnosticism is an ancient belief system that teaches that the material world, which is everything physical, is flawed, evil, or just an illusion, while the spiritual realm is pure and good. Gnostics believe in something called hidden knowledge, and they believe that hidden knowledge is the key to salvation and understanding life's mysteries. They often teach that this secret knowledge helps people escape the limitations of the material world, and that they can reach a higher spiritual truth. Mary held that this secret knowledge would give you healing. Gnosticism also typically holds that there is a divine spark that exists within each person, and it can be awakened through enlightenment. The second thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is how Mary's teaching has influenced today's churches. Well, there's really 4 ways. The first is the concept of faith healing and spiritual authority. Christian Science's central idea is that the mind and the spirit can overcome physical ailments. While the theology and methods do differ, this notion that healing can occur through faith and alignment with divine power is used a lot in charismatic healing practices today. When you see ministries or online Christian influencers talking about spiritual authority over sickness, this comes from Mary's teachings. Second is a rejection of medical treatment. Mary's Christian Science Church promoted a view that healing could be achieved without any traditional medicine. They advocated instead for spiritual and prayer intervention. Now, this has led to a divide in a lot of religious communities regarding whether or not it's okay to rely on medical science instead of simply using divine intervention. Third is the impact on the healing evangelists and the charismatic movement, especially when talking about speaking life or positive confessions. Mary taught the mind's power over the body, and this included these statements, positive confessions or speaking life. When you hear people using this term, positive confessions or speaking life, know that this is rooted in Christian Science belief that the mind has transformative power. And fourth is a mind-body connection. Mary's philosophy also contributed to this broader acceptance of the mind-body connection in religious contexts. This concept has influenced the development of holistic Christian wellness programs that focus on spiritual, mental, and physical health being used all together. To sum up, Mary's Christian Science movement introduced influential ideas about spiritual healing, the mind-body connection, the faith's role in overcoming sickness, and these elements continue to influence a lot of healing ministries and even Christian influencers today. That ends today's episode. Next week, we're going to be discussing the founding of the Seventh-day Advent movement, which was founded in 1863, around the same time as the Christian Science was created. In the meantime, remember that tomorrow you can order my new book, The Church is Corrupted, and if you didn't get my first book, go ahead and get that one at the same time. I'm currently writing the third book in this series, which is called The Church is Reformed, and I'm going to have that out the spring of 2025. So the best way you can support this podcast and also have fantastic books in your library is to order my books. I will see you next week. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. We release new content every Monday. And don't forget to check out our website at lauraleesiemens.com for more information and additional resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week as we continue our journey through the incredible history of the church.